What is going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, and I'm back with another Diablo 4 beta build to bring to you. Now, today we are going to be looking at one of the first two of the two classes that were brought with the second round of the beta, and that is going to be the Druid class. Now, I'm messing about a lot with this build. I think there's a couple of builds that could be potentially viable, but overall, the Druid feels a little bit on the weak side compared to some of the other classes, and definitely if you start comparing it to the Necromancer. That being said, though, the Druid definitely has some nice perks and some nice quirks going for it, and you definitely can get some work done with it. It just requires a specific build and it's very aspect dependent. But if you are able to look past that and you're definitely willing to put in the effort, then definitely the Druid is a lot of fun to be able to use, and the animations make it absolutely top tier in my books. Enough of me yapping though. If you do enjoy the build, if you find something that is enjoyable, make sure you drop that like and subscribe to be able to bring yourself back ready for more builds to be able to come their way onto the channel. But with all that said and done, let's get cracking into the build. Alright, so first and foremost we need to be able to cover our core skills. Now we need to be able to put 2 points in here for us to be able to move down the skill tree, so I've gone for Storm Strike. Now you would have probably thought I would have gone for the Spike ability, which is going to be more to do with Earth, but unfortunately it's a very slow acting ability, and while it does have range, it's very low generating when it comes to Spirit, and being able to enhance it doesn't really help us out. What Storm Strike does though, on the other hand, is though being able to deal a decent amount of damage, pretty much around about the same, allows it to be able to chain up to extra enemies, dealing a little bit extra less damage every single time it does chain, and you also get a nice 25% damage reduction for 3 seconds after being able to deal some damage with the ability. On top of that, we have grabbed the modifiers for a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies hit for 2.6 seconds, so this is amazing crowd control potential, and it just gives us a little bit of versatility when we are trying to stack up our spirit. So moving on from there, we do have our core skills. Now we will be moving away from the Earth ability, and while I do think that the Earth ability is pretty good, having an aspect to be able to change Pulverize into an Earth skill is definitely a better shout, and definitely one of the best choices to be able to go for. What this does is being able to shapeshift into a Werebear and slam the ground, dealing 223 to 273 damage to surrounding enemies. Now this has a very decent AoE, which means that you can do the exact same amount of damage to enemies, whether they're in front of you or whether they're behind you or to the sides. You will be affecting them all the same. On top of that, we have grab modifiers, so that our next Pulverize will overpower every 10 seconds while we remain healthy. To be able to stay as this, or to be able to classify in ready for this modifier, we need to have above 80% of our life at all times, and then it will do a countdown of 10 seconds. Now there are ways for us to be able to stay healthy, but early game you will struggle a little bit to be able to have this consistent, but when you actually get into a little bit later on, when we have a few more points, we will be able to have this and be able to add this to fairly similar or fairly regular DPS potential, meaning that the overpower is absolutely amazing. On top of this, overpower is a massive increase to damage, and that means it's going to bump up our DPS potential just purely from having this, and having it as a consistent way to be able to activate is absolutely amazing. On top of that, we do also have the way to be able to modify it, so enemies hit with Pulverize deal 20% reduced damage for 4 seconds, so we allow ourselves to be able to be a little bit more tanky. I chose this one over the other one for the stun, because while being able to stun enemies for overpower is great and all, being able to have this on every single cast of Pulverize means a great way to be able to help us out with crowd control and being able to stay in the fight regardless of whether we get that overpower or not. But we aren't done with the tree just yet, so we have grabbed a few more extra points here, and one of the first ones we've gone for is Heart of the Wild, increasing our maximum spirit by 3. Now I do think that it's only worth the 1 point in here. I don't think it's worth being able to go all the way up to 3, because that allows us to be able to move forward and be able to grab wild impulses. Your core skills cost 15% more spirit, but they will deal 30% increased damage in return, which is absolutely amazing. It's 100% recommended to be able to grab this for 3 points, because this is one of the better DPS increases when we can go into our skill tree. On top of that, we have also grabbed Predatory Instinct, where critical strike chance against close range enemies, which we will be doing as a melee focused character, is going to be increased by 6%, because we only had the 2 points in here. Now if we do have additional points, if we are able to move this around, then I would happily increase that to 9%. I do think this is a great way to be able to increase our DPS, and being able to make critical strikes a little bit more consistent is absolutely worth it in my view. But anyway, moving on from there, we have gone for our defensive skills. Now, there are a couple of great options to be able to go for, most notably going to be the Werebear, but I think it's best to be able to go for Earthen Bulwark. The reason why is it's going to actually play a lot into our aspects when it comes to the build. Some of the better ones to be able to increase our DPS, but I also think it's probably one of the best defensive skills out there. It has a cooldown of 16 seconds, it has a very good lucky hit chance, which is quite interesting to be able to see considering it just forms a shield around you, and the rocks around you for 3 seconds, granting a barrier that absorbs 45% of your base life in damage. Every single increase to points on this will increase the amount of barrier by 5%, so that's a decent shout to be able to go for if you are looking for extra defense. We are grabbing a couple of extra modifiers though, making it so that our Earthen Bulwark, when we use it, makes us unstoppable, which is great in case we do like get chilled or slow down or anything like that. You can activate this to be able to sprint up to enemies and just be able to catch them unaware. And then also casting Earthen Bulwark grants us 18% base life as Fortify. Now Fortify is going to be a great one to be able to help us out with here, because fortified characters take 10% reduced damage, and you become fortified when you have more fortified than current life, and we have loads of ways to be able to stack this up, meaning that we're going to get a nice decent 10% reduced damage pretty much always all the time, as long as we're able to like start stacking it up and some of our abilities start popping off. But that's enough of when it comes to the defensive skills. Next we're going on to the companion skill tree. Now these are going to actually play quite a bit of factor in terms of increasing our DPS just purely through some of our aspects, and once again this will all come together when we do get to that section of this video. Personally, I have gone for wolves, and I have also gone for the creeper. I've also gone into these to be able to modify them, but technically you could take a couple of points away from here, just depending on where we're primarily using them as to be able to increase our DPS. And if you value being able to increase your own DPS rather than your companions, then you by all means be able to take some of these points away. But first and foremost, we are going for wolves, where as a passive, just from purely having this in our skill tree or skill bar, means that we summon 2 wolf companions that bite enemies for a small amount of damage just from being out there. They're also great to be able to take some of the aggro away, so I have had some cases where the bosses will just purely go after the wolves, and because the wolves have such high health bars, I haven't really seen a wolf die in this game just yet, so I don't even know if it's possible. But if they get the aggro, they pretty much keep the aggro, meaning you can just keep chunking the boss away. When you use the ability though, it directs your wolves to focus an enemy, leaping to them and striking for a decent amount of damage. And then we've also gone for a couple of modifiers where they deal 20% increased damage to immobilize, stunned, slowed or poisoned enemies, which will pretty much always going to be the case considering the crowd control aspects of this build. And then we also have it as another one where with lucky hits, your wolves attacks have a 10% chance to fortify you for 5% of your base life, once again stacking up that fortify, ready for us to be able to have that damage reduction going for us. Now once again, I have mentioned that we have gone for another companion, and the one I've chosen is going to be Vine Creeper. A Vine Creeper periodically emerges around the ground every 7 seconds and applies poison damage over 6 seconds to enemies in an area. And then when you use the ability, and this is going to be the key one, what this will do is it will summon, it will strangle all surrounding enemies, immobilizing all of them for 3.15 seconds and poisoning them for a decent amount of damage over 3 seconds. This area of effect is huge and is always centered around the character, so you can just run yourself into a horde and you can just immobilize a whole bunch of them ready for you to be able to actually go to town with them when it comes to damage. Now we have grabbed a couple of modifiers, one increasing the amount of time that you do actually hold them in place for by 1 second, and then the other one being able to increase our critical strike chance to enemies that are affected by it by 20%, which is absolutely huge. I do recommend being able to grab this one, and this one helps us with our overpowered damage as well as our normal damage output as well. Moving swiftly down the skill tree, we have the Wrath skills, but we're not going to be staying here very long because we are just purely putting 3 points into Crushing Earth, where our Earth skills deal 15% increased damage to slowed, stunned, immobilized or knocked back enemies. And once again, this is going to be part of the standard crowd control that this build can pretty much do, so it is definitely recommended being able to pick that one up and just being able to have a flat damage increase just for purely doing what your build is designed to do. Alternatively, if you do get a few more points, you can go into Safeguard and Stoneguard, which also will increase the amount of Fortify that you get as well as the amount of damage that you can put out, but this requires 6 points for them to be really become viable, and I just don't think we have that as it currently stands in the beta. Once again, once the full game does release, I think potentially that could be a way to go. And then lastly, we just have the 1 point, and this is just purely going to be for our ultimate skill, and we are going to go for Petrify. What this has is a cooldown of 60 seconds, and this will encase all nearby enemies in stone, stunning them for 3.15 seconds, and we will deal 25% increased critical strike damage to every single enemy that is affected by this skill. Alternatively though, if we do use it against a boss, the critical strike damage bonus is increased to 50% instead, and its duration is increased to 6 seconds, meaning that we're pretty much getting double the effect when it comes to bosses, and it's definitely a worthwhile skill when it comes to that. So that pretty much wraps up the skill tree, so technically this is where we move on to something like specializations for rogues, but we're going to do the same for druids, but unfortunately we can't do that because spirit boons, which is the alternative, is just not accessible in terms of the beta, which is a bit of a shame really, because it would have been a lot of fun to be able to mess about with, especially since we can pick up all the resource, but we can't actually use it to be able to go and actually complete the mission to be able to get us access to this. That's because it's locked behind a certain area which the beta does not allow us to be able to enter, so unfortunately you're going to have to stick with us on that one, unfortunately, until the full game launches. So alright, let's have a look at attributes instead for gear, or recommended things to be able to look out for. Of course, increases to our damage and our physical damage are going to be the main ones to be able to go for, because these will directly increase the amount of damage that our skills will be doing, just as a flat bonus in of itself. On top of that, of course, we are looking for things like crowd control damage increases, as well as our critical strike chance and critical strike damage increases. But the real one that is definitely going to be a recommendation from myself is going to be overpowered damage multipliers. Now, overpowered damage multipliers have some of the highest multipliers when it comes to this game, and that's because it's of how infrequent that you normally get them to be able to proc when it comes to other classes. In the case of the Druid, you have access to be able to use this with Pulverize to be able to have a consistent every 10 seconds activation of an overpower, meaning that you can increase that to some stupid numbers. So for example, every single 1,000 points of overpower damage you would have been doing initially, you can get bonuses all the way up to 13.5%, and that's on every single roll. So if you were able to roll that for potentially 9 pieces of equipment, you could have 9 times that, meaning that you're going to be doing over double what your overpower would have been doing, and that is a massive boost every single 10 seconds that you can put that out, and that will affect bosses and that will affect mobs alike. Lastly, I would recommend getting something like some HP on kill, and the reason why is because we do want to be able to remain healthy every single time we go into a fight. And obviously, sometimes if you get horded, you get like 15, 20 enemies all surround you at the same time, all trying to do their hits, and your barrier is only going to last so long. So as long as you are being able to kill things, at least then you'll be able to keep your HP above the certain threshold, meaning that the countdown will still be going, ready for that next overpowered damage. Now, we have just mentioned aspects, and that's going to be the last thing to be able to cover, but obviously certain aspects are going to be better than others, especially when it comes to this build. Now, I highly recommend trying to keep an eye out for this Pulverize one, which is now turns it into an Earth skill, and that also means that casting the Pulverize, we now have Tectonic Spikes, continue to deal damage over 2 seconds, which massively increases our DPS when it comes to this build, and it gives us a nice AoE, ready to be able to take on any kind of hordes that try to attack us after our initial attack. But the fact that it becomes an Earth skill is insane, because that allows us to be able to use things like this. When you have Fortify, your Earth skills gain 2 ranks. Now, there are 2 ways to be able to proc this. The main one is going to be through our Earthen Bulwark, meaning that we're always going to have some Fortify active as soon as we activate that ability, and that allows us to be able to put 2 ranks, which increases the amount of damage that skill would have done in the first place. It allows us to be able to do this for any of the other skills as well, so being able to get 2 ranks onto those, depending on what you've chosen, is also pretty nice. Talking of things that work really, really well with the cast of Earthen Bulwark is going to be something like dealing extra damage when you have a barrier active. Because using Bulwark will give you a barrier in of itself, that means you're now going to be dealing an extra bit of damage, in my case 33%, as soon as I pop that ability. So not only is it giving me some nice defensive utility, it's giving me some nice offensive utility, and I highly recommend being able to use that combo yourself. Other than that though, anything that increases your core skill damage is going to be insane. So anything like attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill all the way up to 50% is great, because not only are we generating resource, we're also generating increased damage for our abilities. And then something like core skills dealing an active additional 6.5% damage for each active companion. Now, what that means is that you're going to have your companions on your skill bar down the bottom, so you're going to have to take some places of your abilities. So even though I have a point into my Raven, just because I don't have the Raven on the skill bar means that I'm not getting that 6.5% because it is not an active companion. So you definitely need to be able to put them into your skill bar for you to be able to get that bonus. And so anyway, that pretty much wraps it up on the Earthen Druid. I've had some great fun with this Druid. I genuinely think it's a lot of fun to be able to mess about with, and it just has that insane DPS potential every 10 seconds. Now, unfortunately, it does fall a little bit flat compared to something like the Rogue, where they have insane damage potential just all the time, and they're fast at being able to do it. But the Druid can take some damage, it can take a beating, and it can still go out there and be able to decimate some mobs as well. So that pretty much wraps it on the video. I want to be able to hear down in the comment section down below, what do you think of the Druid class? Do you think it needs a buff in any kind of way? Do you enjoy the skill set that it currently possesses? And what is your favourite Druid build out there? Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does mean the world to us. Their names appear at the end of every single one of our videos, as always, to be able to show our respect. Like I said, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you have dropped a like and subscribe, ready for some more Diablo 4 content to be able to bring your way, especially when that launch date drops. But with all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.